Hey everybody, this is Craig with Out on Film, and I want to welcome all of you to an Out on Films in Conversations with. And today I am thrilled to be talking once again to director Chase Joynt about his new film with the Art Festival, Framing Agnes. And Chase, welcome back to Out on Film.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
So Chase, let's start. Framing Agnes tells a series of stories focused on Agnes. Tell us a little bit about kind of like how you found these stories, this particular story and stories to tell at this particular point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. So to make a very long story short, my friend Kristen Schiltz and I, and Kristen is a sociologist at the University of Chicago, received a fellowship many years ago in 2014 to work together. And one of the requirements of the fellowship was to teach a class. And so we taught a class called The Politics of Narrative Construction. And we used the case study of Agnes, which emerges out of sociology in the mid-century, as a way to think with students about how different disciplines can make meaning about similar source material. So what happens when sociology has a reading and psychology comes along, and then queer theory comes along, and then trans people get a hold of the material and reinterpret it. And we became obsessed with the complexity of her story and found our way into the private archives of the doctors and researchers who were working at the UCLA Gender Clinic at that time. And through that research, we're able to gain access to transcripts of all of these other gender nonconforming people who never make it into the research. And it allowed us to ask the question, why? And what's at stake when we only, when we lose track and when we lose people along the way.
So one of the things that I like about you as a director and filmmaker is the structure that you use. And I find it, it is not just using reenactment, but using reenactment and then having the people performing that reenactment talk about their experience doing it, which gives us a whole different kind of connection to the material. And in this one, in Framing Agnes, you use the talk show format as that structure. So tell us a little bit about your approach and how you came to embrace this structure in the way that you tell stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was looking at those transcripts early on years ago, it was shocking to me to recognize the relationship between the questions that were being asked by doctors and researchers and the questions that were coming out of the mouths of people like Jerry Springer and Geraldo and Jenny Jones. And they were very eerily similar. And so immediately for me, I thought, well, what would happen if we collapsed the contexts? And we were thinking about medicine and media together as these extraordinary forces that produce certain kinds of meaning and access to trans people. And your statement about not just being reenactment, I really appreciate, because it's true. I'm not particularly interested in reenactment for reenactment's sake. If you have someone on screen saying, I went down my driveway and picked up the mail, and then you show someone walking down a driveway and picking up the mail, you don't actually learn anything about them. And I think people have imaginations and can do that work. But instead, it's a way to really return to this question of what's at stake. And so what happens when you ask trans artists and activists to think out loud about their connections to those who might have come before us? And, as a documentarian, it's really thrilling for me because you can't control the outcome of that circumstance and experience. And that, to me, is the most exciting part about nonfiction work.
One of the things using this talk show format that I think really resonated with me, I know viewing it, and I think people in an audience watching it, is like you were just saying, that kind of, we think of a clinical setting. I mean, we're all kind of suspicious of a clinical setting, but you think there's a professionalism that's going on there, that when you hear these transcripts read back in this format, you feel the same, like you said, the exploitative nature of this line of questioning, but also the strength and dignity of these people answering these questions involved, which I think for me was the most striking part is to hear tone and body language, that these aren't kind of the shrinking violets that you think we all are in a clinical setting, but like, dude, why are you asking me these questions? And it just, it is very resonating, I think, to hear people take that power in that setting. It was that, like, I mean, how was it for you as people are kind of reading these transcripts verbatim back? I mean, what's that like for you as you're filming this?
Yeah, I mean, again, I love that comment because I think it's so true. There's sites of resistance everywhere.
Everywhere.
Even as the media and the medical industrial complex try to contain and control and pathologize, there are constantly moments and circumstances where people are pushing back and saying no, or they're saying yes, but strategically so, because
right.
they don't know what they need, which is another kind of resistance, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the jokes that I make on the circuit with the film is people say, oh, you know, were there things in the transcripts that you left out that you wished could have been in the film? And the answer to that is yes. And it's precisely an answer to this question, because I could have cut a whole sequence of zingers, of like snapbacks, of people just saying absolutely none. And at some point in the edit, we had to take some of them out for flow and tone and all of that. But they're everywhere. There's all of these extraordinary sites of resistance. And I'm with you in finding a huge amount of inspiration and calm in that recognition.
I mean, you know, what I found moving, especially with some of the younger actors that you had, was this recognition of, it was kind of heartening and heartbreaking at the same time, that, you know, all that people are going through, you think you're the only ones, but then you have this whole history of people who came before and who lived lives with dignity, and lived lives being completely vulnerable and afraid at the same time as maintaining dignity and forthrightness. Kind of, and like I said, it's kind of both heartening and heartbreaking at the same time when people are making this realization that, are we better? Is it better? And it seems like we're in a time that is not as talk showy horrific as that era was, because I remember all of those shows kind of like in the 80s and everything, but it's still not great. I mean, it's a dangerous time still. So how is that for all of you on set, trying to kind of navigate through these feelings and discoveries and realizations?
Yeah, I mean, we are in arguably the most heightened moment of backlash against trans and gender nonconforming human rights in a North American context. And I think everyone in the film is hyper aware of those sociopolitical circumstances, and as a result is refusing the kind of look back as if it's not exactly where we are today. And I think that there's a lot of power in that. You know, one of the reasons why Jules Gill Peterson is such an extraordinary interlocutor in the film is because she's someone who can say, I've spent years, you know, finding trans kids, because that we knew that trans kids always existed. And now we're in this moment where it's a very dangerous and very terrifying time to be trans and to be young. And Jules's research gives us tools to how to navigate these systems. And, you know, similarly, someone like Stephen Ira, who can emerge in our film and say, I was someone who was at that clinic in its later iterations, having conversations with doctors who were trained by the doctors who were with it. I mean, it's a wild thing to be able to traffic across time and history in those ways.
You know, in the end, as I was kind of watching and experience, particularly people talking about their portrayals, you know, in this film, I felt a sense of their own empowerment having done this. And I'm wondering if that's your same experience on set, because I could feel a different strength as everybody's talking through. And it felt as if it was kind of cathartic for people to experience your journey in this filmmaking process with you, and I'm wondering kind of, did you feel the same thing in the moment, or is that something that comes out at the end when you put all of this together?
Well, I think the wild thing of making a film like this in this way is that sometimes people are like, how will this come together in the end?
Right.
Who knows what's going to happen?
Like,
So
Chase, what are you doing?
yeah, exactly. It requires a whole lot of trust in the method, which I take responsibility for. But, you know, and I don't want to overspeak people's experiences, catharsis or anything else like that. But what I will say is that I think everyone in the film shares a sense of urgency around trying to tell trans stories differently.
Right.
And I can say with great confidence that everyone in our project has definitely been positioned in other projects in ways that they don't love, whether it's being an expert subject in a documentary where you get cut and spliced and don't sound like yourself, or being on other people's projects where you understand that you don't have any creative control. And so there's something about this project in particular that traffics in performance, but traffics in documentary, asks you to be yourself and not yourself simultaneously. And I think there's a kind of spaciousness, albeit it could be stressful, you know, but also a spaciousness to kind of imagine something else. And so as a result, yeah, I think that the response to the film is also bolstering and exciting, because I think people recognize that we're all really boxed in by the traditional ways that documentary tends to tell stories.
Yes, and the whole boxed in thing really kind of, you really kind of highlight just this movement of boxing, this box, this box, this box, this box, and this obsession that as a culture we have with putting people in boxes. I mean, it's just at a certain point, as you know, I think even Joel starts to talk about it. It's just like box after box after box after box, and you're just like, it's exhausting. And it's, did that kind of just emerge as a theme, or did you kind of? I mean, we always kind of knew that going in, but to demonstrate it the way that you did, you really come away with this kind of this. It's insane the way that we culturally, that our fixation, and it is a fixation on putting people in boxes and like insisting that you're going into some kind of box.
Yeah, and we will not tolerate or accept you if we can't figure out the box where you belong, right? And so it was absolutely a central thread of the project from its start. But I think what you're reacting to are the literal choices in framing, the different kinds of cameras that emerge, the kinds of frames that emerge to keep you in place or to let you out of that place for a moment, only to snap you back into it. And so I could go like very cinema studies geeky on you, but I won't. And just say that, yes, precisely. I think that the film is trying to think about that. And it also is actually trying to never let you escape, because we're not really letting any of those subjects escape until they start to break frame, right? Until Agnes starts to leave and Jules starts to leave, etc.
You know, one of the things that as I was screening this, as we were programming it for the festival, and, you know, I wanted, you know, and I'm thinking about what I always want an audience to come away with. And a lot of it is, I want audience, you know, audience for a queer festival. I want people to be seen. I want people to be validated. I want people to learn. I want people to experience something wholly outside of themselves. And one of the things that I walked away from this really hoping that people connected with in a real visceral way is, you know, this whole line of exploitive questioning that is fixated solely on body. I mean, like all the clinical questions is just obsessed with the physicalness. And what as everyone's talking about their experience and as this is unfolding, what I'm hopeful that people walk away with is seeing a whole person and experiencing a whole person. And I'm curious kind of what also that's what I was hoping. It's what I wanted people to walk away with. And so I'm curious as you kind of think through it, what do you want people to walk away with? Because I even think in our own community, we focus too much on body and physical, and not on all of us as people.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that there's lots of takeaways from the film, depending on who you are to
Right.
it, and so I was just at a festival recently that will remain nameless, where the first question that was asked to me in the Q&A was something, and I'm paraphrasing here, but something like, were you surprised that you made a film so specific about a specific community that's had such a wild mainstream uptake and that premiered at Sundance? And I was like, first of all, what an insulting question to lead with, but also what it speaks to is the fact that people imagine that only trans people are interested in trans stories.
Right.
And I just think, first of all, what a limited and reductive understanding of audience, period. But also, I think that there's something about staying really specific to community histories and to these questions that actually allows for a broader audience perspective. And so I'm just as excited by the non-trans person, the person with very little prior interest in the history of gender and sex, walking into our film and taking something from it, having an awareness, because we are all navigating and negotiating gender and the medical industrial complex, and we are actually all being patrolled and contained in these boxes, even if they feel more spacious for some of us than others. And so, I think that that's really dynamic, but I'm also, as a maker, regardless of my identity, suspicious of documentary. And I feel excited by the opportunity to really push at the boundaries of the genre. And so I'm hoping that there's also an opportunity for our film and films like ours to challenge the genre, to say we can really tell nonfiction stories in more provocative ways.
Kind of talking about stories, one of the things that, I've been doing the festival for a long time, programming for a long time. And one of the things that, or thematically or content wise, and I just wanted to get your perspective. I'm not seeing, and this kind of pivoting off just content in general, I'm not seeing a lot of content focused on a trans masculine experience. And maybe we have blinders on and we're not finding it, but I wanted to at least acknowledge that, I'm not seeing as much as I would like to see in terms of content being able to be made in terms of both narrative, feature and documentary. And I just wanted to get your perspective. Just, I want to be able to encourage, more and more, all of our community, and I feel like a trans masculine experience is not silent, but not as vocal as I think I personally would like to see. And from your perspective as a filmmaker, and I know that all of these films are hard to make. And I want our audiences to, I think they understand that, but just from your perspective, about kind of where we are at this point in storytelling and representing the entirety of our community.
Yeah, it's a great ongoing question and challenge, and I think that the important thing to say first is that the reason we have more access to trans femme stories is because we live in a culture that both valorizes and scapegoats femininity at every turn. And so it's just a broader product, I'll take the word just out of that. It's a broader product of the culture of misogyny and sexism. But also that I think in one of the things that Jules draws our attention to in Agnes is the ways in which trans masc identities and people have slipped under the radar and passed and inhabited various cultural worlds without being seen in a similar way. And so it's something that we explore in Ordinary Man, and something that I think we on here, like, what does it mean to tell a kind of trans masculine history? And, there are definitely documentary portrait projects. I'm thinking about early films like Southern Comfort or like The Aggressives that are sort of community portraits about trans masc identities. But then we gain access really to the kind of singular hate crime legislative social media force that is the Brandon Tina story and Boys Don't Cry, which
Right.
continues to elevate a kind of white transmasculine rural
Right.
experience. And so I think that the time is now, and there are lots of people working. And, you know, one of the things that my friend Riley Snorton likes to say is, well, there's not a lot of trans mask representation on screen. There's a lot of trans mask people making movies and behind the camera. And
Yeah.
I think that that's also a very useful and exciting opportunity for us
Yeah.
to keep pushing and to keep challenging the question that you asked, for sure.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to bring the question up, because I want to keep this part of the discussion as we are ongoing in these conversations about visibility and representation and kind of how we live in all of our complexity and humanity and messiness. And I wanted to at least acknowledge that and kind of keep this as part of the conversation as we all move forward in developing, you know, content and telling our stories. So Chase, tell us what's next for Framing Agnes. Kind of where are we going? I mean, you're on the festival circuit. You know, I think it's from, you know, what I read and kind of what our audiences have seen so far, is being received very well. So talk to us a little bit about, you know, what's next for the film.
Yeah, we're so grateful to have been on the festival circuit for now 10-ish months.
Okay.
And we will have a theatrical release at Film Forum. We start at Film Forum in New York the first week of December, and we'll be in theaters for a while. So the journey is ongoing.
All right. You know, I always think, you know, all art and people who create art, you know, it stays with you as you progress in your own journey as an artist. What about Framing Agnes is going to stay with you?
The very strongly felt reality that collaboration is the future.
Excellent. Chase, I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and our patrons here at Out on Film. For all of you out there watching, if you haven't seen Framing Agnes, please seek it out. There's still a couple of days left to watch it at Out on Film. And after Out on Film, look for a theatrical release and any place else that you can find Framing Agnes and experience a piece of our history that also brings us, I think, to more contemporary and kind of keeps the conversation and experiences going. So Chase, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Craig.